Okay, then we are recording, and I can officially welcome you all to today's training or session on measuring impact of social ventures. So Alberto, you can go to the next slide if you want.
Yes.
I just wanted to briefly mention that Alberto and I are joined today by our colleague from Designscapes, Kirsten Junge from the Tavistock Institute. And that has also previously led the training module on theory of change. So maybe you are also familiar with her. And also by Maje and Pascual from Civimetro, that is a fellow initiative funded by the project of Designscapes. So that's great. We're really excited about that. Kirsten, Maje, Pascual, do you guys want to briefly introduce yourself, or is there anything else you want to tell?
No.
Okay. Okay, then we.
Thanks, Alicia. I think that was.
If all is good, then we can jump right into business. So, yes, so we first wanted to say that we have a Miro space where we're going to be working on today. So we will be sharing the slides through the Zoom, but at some point we will jump into Miro to fill in a template that we've prepared there. So you can find, I think it's not there yet, but Alberto, if you could paste the link on the chat,
yes.
that would be great.
I just need to
thank you.
Temporarily stop this.
Oh, then I can do it if you want.
Okay, yes, thank
That's
you. So I
better.
need to stop sharing.
Yeah,
or
no
I can
problem.
just share it afterwards as you want.
Let me see. Everyone. Okay, there you should have the chat, so you can start opening if you want. Later on, we will have a presentation from Kirsten, and that also will be through the space, the slides we are sharing in Zoom, so don't get too lost on Miro yet. Okay, so that said, we can jump into the agenda for today. I'll go really quickly because our first step in our minds was to have to start with a check-in moment and hear from everybody about how is it going in terms of evaluation in your projects, because that's the topic for today. We wanted to align and see what does evaluation mean at this stage for each of you, and if you've done a bit of it or not. And after that, we will hear from Kirsten on measuring the impact of social ventures, brief presentation, and then it's when we will jump into Miro to use the template we've prepared for an individual reflection on evaluation and your initiative. We will share all that in the group discussion and hopefully learn from each other and share some final thoughts. So that's the plan for today. That said, to keep on time, let's jump into the check-in moment. So this is when, like I said just now, when I want to ask you guys, hi, how is it going with evaluation? What are you doing at the moment? Is it something you've been able to tackle already in your project? If so, what are you evaluating? How? I also want to say any story about why you have not been doing evaluation yet. It's also more than welcome. So yeah, we could do a round of to hear all of you a bit about this topic.
Maybe I can start.
Great.
So since we submitted already all the paper for Designscape, it means that we did an evaluation. So we evaluated the process, how it was going, and internally, how it was going, the cooperation with the other partner, and how is it going, the implementation of the project in Sicily. So we did these three parts. And why we did that is first, of course, for reporting issue, because of Designscape, but also because we found it that is very important for foundation where we are asking right now funding to understand what is the process that was handling so far and which are the indicators that we want to measure also in time for the future of the project, so the impact that the project will actually have when we are implementing. So this is the main reason why we are doing that.
Yeah, and can I ask how?
So basically, because lately I was doing a master course in evaluation of social impact, we started with the value chain, understanding which are the activity that we are going to perform, which are the outcome, which are the output, outcomes, and impact, and then define all the metrics to measure all of that. We started from that, and then potentially we will also attach with other indicators, potentially connected with SDGs and with, I don't know how they're called, but basically the parameters that EU is bringing upon for the new programming of the development of a project in Europe, because potentially we would like to see if we are eligible for some of the grant at the European level, but this a bit in time, like in the next years.
Okay, great. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you.
Anne, would you be willing to tell us a bit how is it going for you guys? I don't hear you. I don't know if I'm supposed to.
Okay. Do you listen to me?
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
listen?
Yeah, now I can hear you. Yeah.
Yes. No.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. We are using the theory of change to measure the impacts, social, environmental, economical, political, and communication. We have most of the impacts, but the Acroplaza is now being built, so we need to see how it works after the construction, which would be in a week.
Nice, great. And yeah, theory of change we hear. I see that also X team is now on board. Hi guys. Hi there. I see you now. We were asking, I don't know if you arrived on time, but we were asking everybody if they wanted to share briefly how they were doing in terms of evaluation, if they had taken a moment to do this in the project, and why and how. So Marco or X team, do you guys want to also share for your initiative? Doesn't seem like it's possible. And I see also Hannah, we've heard from Julia. Greg, do you have something to share in terms of your experiences or struggles with evaluation?
I'd say struggles is accurate. Though we've been working with a theory of change since the beginning of this project, and in the process of having to revamp everything on a really regular basis, actually working with community groups and social ventures involving real, human bodies in physical spaces. Obviously, we've had to revisit and constantly change the design. So we've been keeping, or it just changed the way in which we are moving forward, but we've been keeping close tabs on changes, the overall goals. We've obviously had limitations due to COVID, so we're manically trying to do as much as we can with the 2-month extension with real life work as well, whilst continuing to make sure that we are moving towards our original goals, and also taking sustainability into account because of the limitations that this time period has. But it's looking good on those fronts. But we're mostly working with theory of change and as much qualitative records and numbers, qual and quant information as we can pick up as we've gone along.
Nice, great. Thank you, Greg, for sharing. Well, it's nice to hear from some of you. For those that couldn't share now, we're gonna have time enough, I think, later on to also discuss as a group. So that's it. Should we jump into the presentation that we have today before our workshop. Kirsten, are you ready to take over?
You're muted.
Yeah, exactly. So I was just about to say yes, and then I realized I'm muted, so clearly no, but I am now
Great.
ready to take over. Thanks everybody for sharing where you are. I kind of feel what I've got to say is partly redundant, and certainly that Julia is perhaps better, and you know, everybody's almost better qualified to give this talk than I am. So that's actually fantastic as far as I'm concerned. And I'm extremely impressed. So then perhaps considering kind of where you are and kind of the sophistication with which you're clearly thinking about evaluating your project, and you'll see I've sort of changed slightly sneakily the word impact to outcomes, because I think this is really what we can sort of focus on realistically within sort of the time frame that we have. So my little presentation, which is really designed as a prompt more than anything, is then maybe in the context of where you are serving a point of just maybe reassurance, should that be needed, that kind of what you're doing, I think sounds fascinating and great, and you're on the right track. And maybe just reminding and prompting and giving you a tool to help think through how to sort of practically go about collecting data around the outcomes. Should this be valuable? And I probably won't take too long. So there is space for some questions, and you know, if there's sort of specific things that you're grappling with, then maybe that's the place to initially start to raise them, as well as later on in the discussion. So that's just briefly what I wanted to do, just reminding ourselves, but you don't need the reminder, so I'll be very quick about that, about why we're using, what is theory of change, why we're using it, reminding us what's the difference between outcomes and impacts, and that can be quite tricky sometimes. And I think actually, in fact, even for me, and I've been evaluating for 15 years, sometimes thinking about outcomes and the difference to, you know, outputs and impacts can be quite challenging. So kind of it's useful to have some sort of definitions in mind. And then I was going to offer you a little kind of matrix that is, I think, quite nifty in working out how we can go about doing measuring and collecting data on outcomes. So every evaluator's favorite cartoon, I would say. So why we're using theory of change, where we're trying to basically unpack the miracle that sort of happens in between us spending a lot of time and money and effort working on something and then producing hopefully some outcomes. And why that's useful, as you all know, in interventions in particular deal with sort of systemic change, which is I think what we're all doing, is that a lot happens between us developing a project and engaging with end users, and then looking at actually what have we achieved. And a lot of factors from the environment and various bits, social, economic, environmental, can, as we say, intervene, can contribute or affect the outcomes that we're achieving. So that's one of the reasons why we're using theory of change, is to help us at the beginning, of course, articulate and be quite clear about what it is we're doing and why we think we're going to achieve our outcomes by thinking about our activities and outputs. And then as we're evaluating, going back to these causal chains, as we call them, these are the arrows, and if-then statements. So if we have done all of the activities that we planned, and if we've produced all the outputs from our work, then we should have achieved our outcomes and impact, and that's what we're going to measure. So it's a way of thinking about why we've achieved things as much as that we have achieved things. Now, outcomes, when we talk about outcomes, it would be useful to hear what you think and how you've gone about it. We sort of tend to split outcomes into immediate outcomes and intermediate outcomes. So immediate outcomes are the changes that we can pick up immediately after running an activity. So these tend to be changes in attitude, changes in knowledge of people who we've worked with, changes in skills. So, you know, we could do an evaluation of this event, a quick survey, on, asking, have you learned anything? Yes, no, and kind of can get some sort of sense of the outcome of this event. Intermediate outcomes are those that are a little bit, that are perhaps more significant, if you like, for want of a better shortcut. So that kind of translate into actual changes of behavior. So actually we're kind of motivating people to do things differently. So again, sort of at the end of this event, you're looking at, you're changing the definition of outcomes that you've used in your project, and measuring and then formulating a different measurement framework as a sort of behavioral intervention. That would be an intermediate outcome of this event. Impacts are really changes, sort of the big societal changes that we're looking to achieve. So they tend to be quite big. So for instance, they're sort of, there might be like changes in the sustainable management of urban ecosystems. That seems to have been cut off, sorry. Or a reduction of social exclusion. I don't know what happened there. So a reduction of social exclusion problems, or an increase in participation of people who are facing disadvantages. So quite significant social changes. And often these changes really materialize not immediately after the end of a project or program, but they normally take a little bit of a longer time to materialize, which is one of the reasons why I focused on outcomes in this session. So how do we go about measuring outcomes? And here again, it would be useful to kind of hear from you what you've done, but I think this is quite a nice matrix of thinking, how can we translate the outcomes that we've defined for our projects actually into something measurable, and then thinking through how we're going to get the data to achieve that. So if we're thinking of using our intervention to perhaps improve young people's confidence, we can think about an indicator that goes something like an improvement in self-confidence measure. Then we can think through what data sources would give us meaningful information to feed into this indicator. And we might choose a survey here, an online survey in our case, where the young people answer a few questions on the level of their confidence at the end of an activity. So when will we do this? So we would do this at the end of the project or at the end of an activity, depending on how our project is designed. And who might collect this data? Well, probably it has to be us. So it has to be some intermediary to kind of reach out to the young people. And what's the frequency that we can think about? Let me just move everyone's image. Then the final thing we need to think through is sort of how many young people, in this case, do we need to reach in order to get meaningful data of the change that we've achieved? So does it have to be, do we think 50% of the young people who we've engaged might be enough, or do we want and need 100%? And I think that is normally not an absolute measure, but it depends a little bit about how many we think we can get and how many generally we've engaged with. So we can do some stats work if we want to do it. And just thinking of Julia and your conversations with funders, kind of what would be acceptable to the audiences for which we're evaluating. So maybe for some audiences, just 10% would be enough because it gives a flavor. So these are all things that we can think through. And kind of similar, if you've got an outcome for stakeholders improving their skills in design thinking, which has been sort of quite a feature, I think, in Designscapes funded pilots. Again, we can think about a useful measure of this being the number of our stakeholders that now use design tools, and then how can we get this information where we might want to have a chat with them, or if we've got enough stakeholders, we might want to survey them, and when would we want to do this? Probably at the end of the project. And again, who would want to do that? And then how many of our stakeholders are we looking to address in order to get meaningful data? So is it 1, 2, 3, 5, 10%? So that's basically what I wanted to share with you, which and then what's an indicator? you might probably be quite familiar with that, but I think it's useful to remind ourselves about some of the sort of key features of an indicator, because I personally find indicators sort of quite tricky to construct, and there are various frameworks, including SMART and Boring and a number of others, but essentially trying to make indicators relevant and specific to the outcome that we're looking to construct. They should be objective in the sense that if somebody else used them, they would get a measure of the same item, and they need to be formulated to be something that we can actually measure and where we can actually get the data. And there's sort of various guidelines for that, how to do that. So, but I thought this is really the key thing that I wanted to share with you, because I think as a sort of practical tool, depending on where you are in your evaluation work, this is potentially quite a useful practical tool to use and think through how you're going to get the outcome data, if you haven't already done it, as some of you already have. So shall I leave this up there? And if people want to kind of ask questions or share some thoughts, comments, disagreements, I can do that, or I stop share so we can see each other more easily.
Thank you, Kerstin. Thanks a lot. Do we have any questions in the audience?
Maybe I have something that it's a bit of a larger question, because, for example, our project has impact that can be measured, let's say, in a limited period of time. For example, how many participants will take place in the tour that we are organizing. But then the greater impact of the whole project, meaning inspiring youngsters to actually build a sustainable business in Sicily, it's something that can be measured in time, but is also playing a role in some sort of also other aspects of their life. So maybe they join our tour, plus they had a certain type of education, plus they met someone, and then they decided to build a business there. So sometimes I feel like what we can actually measure is just aspirational. I can tell you that my project helped a little bit, but I cannot take all the merit of it. So I don't know how you communicate these nuances when you're doing this presentation or these evaluations.
I think that's a really good point, and that's really happening so often. And that's kind of the temporal dimension that I spoke to earlier. That often, I mean, I've been in situations where even half a year after a program has ended, suddenly we saw all this impact, which we weren't able to capture. I think breaking down, just being almost quite clear about the cluster of outcomes that you want to achieve, and linking those to impacts, and diffuse theory of change is a great way. And we often talk about like distance traveled to a particular outcome or impact. So if you're kind of quite clear, or if through your evaluation work, I don't know, often interviews are quite good in kind of unpicking a sort of a journey that a participant is at. If through this data collection you can almost build a model saying, oh well, immediately after they participated, we really picked up increasing confidence and interest in entrepreneurship, and people knew much more about it. And then I don't know, we spoke to them 3 months after, we spoke to them again, and kind of we picked up other things. So if you're sort of almost able to use the theory of change to build a model, then you can make sort of plausible causal links and maybe create a journey, especially if you're looking at external literature as well, saying actually there's evidence from the scientific community which suggests that if these things in place, then a young person is more likely to, do this or that. Then I think the story you can tell is a sort of distance travel. So we know there's a journey towards entrepreneurship, and we've traveled within the parameters of the project. We've traveled that distance towards these outcomes and impacts.
Great, thank you.
Pascual.
Yeah, I have a question. To define the indicators, that you show this table in which you define the indicators for the outcomes. How do you link this with the theory of change? I mean, the idea would be to define indicators for all items that you identify in the theory of change, the outcomes, or just to try to measure outcomes and impact, and then link it with the product and resources that you put into the product.
You would normally measure the steps in between as well, just to give you a sense of scale of what you've achieved. Yes, so you would have to you would normally do it for key aspects, certainly of all elements of theory of change, but I focus on outcomes because that's, I guess, what we're talking about. But you're right, yeah, you would have to, if you're looking at the young people, especially if you're wanting to make the changes between outcomes and impacts, you would have to have a sense of how many young people you've engaged. So if it was 2, for instance, you would be able to tell a different story about the impact that you've achieved further down the line than if you've reached 2,000 in a very small area. So there's something about scale and understanding what you've done beforehand. Thank you, Pasquale. Yeah, that's a useful point.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have more questions from the audience? Otherwise, we can even go to the individual reflection part, let's say, and then after that one, we will keep on with the discussion.
Yeah, indeed. I wanted maybe to give a brief intro because I think we have people that join after. So Alberto has shared already, I think everybody's there, but has shared on the chat the link to Miro board. And we will be working there on a template that we've prepared for each of you, so you can find the one with the name on your initiative, and to reflect a bit reflect individually for some minutes about the evaluation in your initiative. And like Alberto was saying just now, then we can come all together again and share experiences.
Yeah, maybe it's good to ask everyone first if you can find your template on the board, because we know that sometimes on Miro it's easy to get lost.
Yeah.
So
we're here to help.
Exactly. So we know that you are in the right place. Just for information, then we have, okay, ticket tour on the top. In yellow, we have Agroplata in purple, pinkish on the left, top left. Keystone for you, Greg, is the blue one, the dark blue one. Do you see it? On the left, and then we have City Here Log and Star Park at the bottom. I don't know if, okay. My connection is unstable.
But I think more or less we hear you, or at least I can follow.
Okay. All right. I hope then my Wi-Fi supports us for the rest of the way. I will then introduce you the template. So if you all find yours, as Alicia already mentioned, we have prepared a template for each of you. We have a first list of questions on top, which is this one, which really build on Kirsten's presentation, basically, especially the last slide that we have just discussed. So the questions go from asking what were your main goal of your project, and then 3 main outcomes that you feel like you have achieved, to then pass on to the evidence that you have of these outcomes and the data that you have collected that can actually help you measure that, those indicators, and make them tangible. Finally, we would like you to think about what's been more challenging to evidence and make tangible in your evaluation so far, or what you expect to be more challenging. if you haven't done it yet, or if you haven't not evaluated some aspect, because then we would love to hear your questions on, again, similarly to what we try to do now at the beginning, what would you like, be curious to ask others and to discuss further? Because today, as you know, we want to give full space to this. So I guess from my side, this introduction is finished. You can already start with your template, and we will give you 15 minutes. So
yeah, to leave enough time for a group discussion afterwards.
Exactly. And yeah, if you have any questions, please let me know.
Would you mind sending the ticketer people in the breakout room?
Ah, yes, good one.
Otherwise, we always like
I
double.
will. Yeah, I know, but that's a good one. I will make a breakup room now. Okay, it's been 10 minutes. How is everyone doing? Quite fine. We have some couple of minutes more to complete your template. Sabrina also joined us, and I see she also found a template, so she will catch up also in the discussion. Nice to have you with us.
Yes, nice. Then a couple more minutes and we all chat to each other. So how are we doing? Is everybody ready or almost ready?
Seems
I
like
see a lot of...
Well, let's also remind that it's not necessary to have it complete. We wanted to use it as a reflective moment, and also to spark useful questions, interesting questions and doubts for this follow-up conversation, which is actually the most valuable part, as we have today many experts on the topic. So I would say whoever wants can start sharing quickly. I need to send back Hannah and Julia. I will do.
Oh yes, we forgot that. We almost leave them there alone.
In their room. Yes. So I see, for example, Anne wrote quite a bit of things. Do you want to start it off? Maybe telling us a bit about what you wrote and your doubts and questions.
Okay. So here in the goals, like the main objectives, which were to encourage the citizens to participate, in a participatory process, and also sensitize them to about the importance of promoting ecological urban habitats, and encouraging the city council to develop more ecological public spaces. And these are like the main objectives.
Yeah.
Like I continue explaining all of the questions, or how?
If you could just
Yeah.
guide us really quick on what you think were your outcomes and how you guys evidenced that.
Okay, the outcomes were like the systems we used for the ecological technologies we used on the project. Also, the participation and the between neighbors, and also local enterprises, and to become a more biodiverse place, the square, because now it's a hard square, and the evidence is like the participation we did, the local enterprises participating, the technologies used, and the systems used in the project, and how many citizens were participating. Also, like the reactions in the social media, and like we will see also after the construction how it changed the use of the square. That's it.
Okay. And was there anything particular challenging and or other questions that you would like to discuss further?
Okay, I think the most difficult outcome to measure is like the social outcome, because it's something is going to change over the years, and like we will know how it changed the use of the square, and how the citizens have been participating in the process, and their motivation about this type of ecological systems and participatory processes, but we don't know how it will develop in time. And I don't know what to ask to the others.
Well, don't worry.
What was they will answer the most challenging evidence.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll know it soon, hopefully, and don't worry.
But also, sorry, Alberto, to hijack, but also I was wondering about this point, like, because it probably pops up again if we have already any reactions from the rest of you, or maybe, I know it's putting you on the spot, but Kerstin, is there some thoughts that you have about this? So evidencing social impact or outcomes, and how indeed, like Anne is saying, it will change across the years and the time. How to deal with that? Kerstin, you are muted, sorry.
Sorry. Like a schoolboy error, as we say in English at this time. Yes, thank you, Lisa. I did have some questions. I think it's interesting to read about the social outcomes, and they found it challenging to evidence. And in some ways, I'm not surprised. And it does, because it's often quite challenging. My thoughts, I guess, were twofold. This problem, I guess, is a sort of classic case of working with theory of change and thinking, because when we do that, sort of one of the first thing is that we think about what's sort of the problem situation that we're trying to address. And that can separate into various parts. So that can be, in your case, that can be sort of just can't change this. This can be ecological problems, there can be economic problems, and it can be social problems. So one of my questions or reactions to your question or to your challenge is, do you have a hypothesis, or did you have at the beginning a hypothesis about, or an understanding of what the social problems are and how they might change as a result of you creating, you improving this place in the socially deprived neighborhood? So that's the first thing. And then you're absolutely right. Social impacts that change over the years, and it's one of the evaluators' ongoing frustrations that I really think, unless somebody in this webinar has come up with some sort of magic solutions, that has eluded me, the only way really to capture those outcomes is to maybe go back to people and speak to them again after 3 months, maybe, or after 6 months.
Yeah. Indeed. Thank you, Kirsten. Any comments on this, or any takes or further questions?
Yeah, about this, maybe also because regarding this idea to trying to have more data after the project, so I guess the idea behind is to trying to compare with the results that we get when we finish the project. With this idea to compare, maybe it could be also interesting to have data at the beginning. When you start your project, trying to have data about how it is, the things that you want to change, what is the state of the thing. So when you finish your project, you can try to compare and try to understand if your project have a real impact on that or not. And another thing that comes to my mind is regarding this is also, I think it's important to have like your population really clear with the people that you are focusing on your project. So when you're trying to collect your data and when you're trying to compare this data, and also understanding that the social behavior changes a lot. If you have your population really clear, if you have the people that you are focusing on the project really clear, maybe this changes a little bit less, or this fluctuation is a little bit more, I don't know how to say, more tangible, that you have more control on, I don't know.
Okay, thank you, Pascual. Who wants to share next their answers and questions? Shall I pick? Then we go with Greg. I don't see you. Now I see you. Sorry, it's because I'm sharing the screen. I don't see all your faces. Do you want to guide us quickly, Greg, through your answers and questions?
Yeah, because the answers are pretty brief. So can you enlarge? I'll look at Zoom. Yeah, you have, in fact. Right. Well, I mean, the issue for us really has been having to constantly reimagine our project, because it involves young people and physical spaces in the environment, and obviously and young people with massive trust issues. So and quite frequently with access to information technology being quite limited. And the COVID effect. So you know, that's meant that we've had to be very, very inventive in our methods of moving towards the overall goal, which was, and the overall goal of the Keystone Community Labs was to engage young people in local community issues and take back ownership of, well, or to engage more with the political world, instead of, you know, feeling like they have power to make a difference and to come up with, you know, the overall goal was for them to come up with suggestions for innovations that can occur in their communities and their, whether it's the youth centres that we work in all the communities, on some very challenged estates in South London that I'm working with. So our challenge has been to redefine the project constantly so that we can keep moving towards this overall goal. So we've actually had to work with with changing groups over time and on multiple strands simultaneously. So what are three main outcomes? Amazingly, we've had engagement of some young people on these estates, which is really phenomenal. In this period, so they're actively involved in moving forward on all of these multiple strands, but primarily via what I'm calling community reporting. So we've got that. We're not as far forward as I would have liked to have been, and that's COVID effect, but nevertheless we've got groups in both places. We've actually managed to engage young women, girls, and actually the young people themselves have reached out to the wider community to try and get feedback from young women, for example, in one centre. So there's some evidence there. I think the most significant outcome we have is we have a fully functioning podcasting studio at Stockwell Community Trust Community Centre. That our young people are actually engaging with and producing material. I mean, that's quite a phenomenal development. There's also been, and so that's very positive. There's significant moves also going on over. We've got workshops set up. Particular problem in the other location is a relationship with the police. So we've got further workshops set up to actually see what we can do with that. And to be honest with you, the goal is probably to continue working beyond, you know, this particular project's end, towards some of these goals. So which one's this? What evidence do you have that these outcomes have been met? We've got physical evidence. We've had, where we've been able, we've got records obviously of who's been attending. We've got survey returns and qualitative feedback from the young people, recordings, etc., etc. So, and a podcasting studio.
Okay. Yeah, you mentioned.
Yeah, that was data I was really addressing there. I mean, we've got engagement, we've got records of who's taken part in what sessions, we've got physical recordings, we've got some video stuff. We've got a lot of pictorial records, and we've got more. So we will be engaging the young people and stakeholders in both interviews and further surveys.
Okay, and I cannot select this one, but you can read it maybe. So yeah. I guess this is your quest. Yeah, what showed more challenging? As you mentioned already, to adapt a lot.
Yeah, it's been an adaptation in this very, very difficult period. And the key issue for the sort of thing that I'm doing is trust. And if you're not physically in front of these young people, I mean, they've got, but we've found quite interesting ways of working around this. And I've done much more working through certain groups of people that were already in contact with some of the young people. But what we've done has worked, but we've had to be, it's been very, very stressful, in fact, trying to constantly adapt to tick lots of boxes or to deal with lots of difficulty. But sorry, I'm trying to read the rest of that.
Okay.
Yeah, this is
yeah.
Yeah, this is, I'd be interested if anyone has any feedback on one of the challenges. Our design, the community lab concept is basically bottom up, co-creation throughout. However, partly to do with COVID, but also partly to do with changing regulations, political environments, in youth work, and as it relates to community centres, which is where our labs have been located. There's great difficulty on these estates. So it's been a constant battle to keep co-creation and bottom-up ideology as a part of this, when centres are talking about limiting expectations and, you know, frameworks, political frameworks, funding requirements, the legal aspects of youth work are all tending to, and safety, particularly health and safety, are creating a climate that makes it, people are very well, it's becoming increasingly top down, the structure that I'm working with. So I don't know if that makes sense. It's been a struggle to present an alternative ideology to existing organizations. I don't know if anyone else has partner organizations that they are working with. And I mean, obviously you're probably not working with youth, but I'd be interested to hear if anyone's had ideological challenges that they've experienced in working with partner organizations.
Any comments?
Nobody?
I've got an association, Greg, because what you said resonates in some of the work that I'm doing, and I do wonder sometimes whether, certainly in the UK, the pandemic has pushed the system towards centralization generally.
I think it was
from the top to, you know, in all matters.
Certainly in terms of youth work, I think it was heading in that direction before the pandemic, but I think that the pandemic has crystallized some of these things. But I'd just be interested to know how people, it's more about how you maintain these relationships, really, whilst still, you know, suggesting an alternative way of working. But yeah, thanks, Kirsten. That was my suspicion as well. So but the sort of COVID certainly helped fear-driven stuff, indirectly, because we've got the COVID effects, but I think it's made people much more fearful about you know, making a mistake, I guess. All right, that's it from me.
Okay.
Thank you, Greg.
I think we can go to the next one, ticket tour.
Yes.
And since we are actually going a little bit running out of time, maybe we can go directly to your questions, and or what you'd be curious to ask others, your doubts, questions.
Yes. So generally speaking, we would be interested in understanding if other people, other group are also thinking about measuring behind the, like beyond the.
I lost Julia.
Rose to me. Okay.
Time, or it's something that will end at the end of the project. And then I think my connection is a bit unstable. I hope you're still listening to me. Yes. When we're what we mean with surprise and magic measurement, we mean how can you measure something that you were not envisioning before. So let's say that out of your scope of work, there is maybe a strong friendship or even partnership, business partnership that is created among the participants, but it's not something that you were thinking when you start measuring everything in time. So how do you deal with certain things that can be surprisingly happening during the course of your project? Because we know how to measure certain things that are important for founders, for partners, etc. But there are also certain things that we are also not aware of. So we were just wondering, how can we measure that part?
Okay, any reaction on this?
Well, this topic for us, for example, for Maje and me with Civimetro, I would say that I think it was one of the greatest hits in our project, that we were always struggling with this. So and we don't know yet. What we are thinking right now is that well, first of all, that for us it is important to have an initial plan, that what you want to evaluate, in order to understand when this surprise is coming, you understand that it is a surprise because it's out of your initial plan. So if you have a plan, then you can understanding real when kind of surprises are happening. And then and what I mean by this initial plan for us is this theory of change, is to have all the evaluation since the beginning, to have it really like defined, all the items that are defined in the project and all the process and all the indicators that we want to measure. And then trying to also to what we are thinking right now is trying to have like a number of indicators not defined. Like if we have a scope for the evaluation that in terms of resources, we have to like scope our evaluation. We are going to have, I don't know, 30 indicators, 20, whatever. Not try to define 20 indicators. Try to define at the beginning like 15, 16, 18, whatever. And then you can, if during the process you you see something that you think is it has value to be measured, then to define an indicator ad hoc during the process, and then you include that in the evaluation. But we don't know. We are just starting with that. I don't know what, for example, I'm curious about the thoughts on of Kerstin on this.
So it's interesting actually. So for evaluators, the surprises, we would call them unintended outcomes. And actually the kind of the more you work with complexity, the more you actually almost expect unintended outcomes of your intervention, because it's impossible to predefine everything. So I would agree with Pascal. Yes, I mean, it's really important to kind of have an hypothesis of what you think will happen through your theory of change, and to also to expect things that you didn't foresee. And so the only way to get to these unexpected outcomes is to talk to people, right? So now then it depends on, so talk to people, and then it depends on how you think about measurement, right? So sometimes actually having rich qualitative stories, depending on how big your population is, of particular unintended outcomes, and that sort of unpack and explain how they came about and why they're important. And it's important to say that surprises or unexpected outcomes can be good or bad, right? Can be positive or negative. Is extremely valuable for us for learning, but also then for kind of thinking about actually what does that mean for our impacts. Now, if you're in a position where you have to generate quantitative data and you've got a sort of largish population of people who you could ask, in an ideal world, you'd go through a two-stage process, right? You kind of have a small group of people who you speak to, and asking them not only about the outcomes that you think you want to achieve, and so to what extent do people say, you know, they've achieved them, but in those conversations have an open question to say, you know, what else did you get out of participating? Tell me. And then kind of think of, if they struggle, kind of to prompt them a little bit, kind of think, well, you know, did you get this or this or this, you know, in a way. And then you could use those, if you do this with a small sample of people, you could and you were doing a quantitative survey as well, you could build these new categories into your survey and kind of check them with the wider population, and then get quant data on those unintended outcomes that you didn't foresee.
Great, thank you.
So that's the ideal case. It's not always possible.
Yeah,
but
no, I can imagine.
But it's possible to do either or as well. So you could just do qual work, or you could have an open question, which is more work in a quantitative survey, and pick the categories and say what other outcomes or what other results, what other effects did participation have, and then people can give free text, and then you just have to go back and code and generate some data from that.
Great, thanks. Alberto, I think you're muted.
I am. I'm doing Kirsten. No, we saw that. So X-Team had to leave. I now wanted to leave actually the floor to Kirsten and Pascual for the last questions and for continuing this discussion in the time that we have left. So you guys have further questions regarding any other doubts? For example, does anyone connect with the things that we just discussed for their respective project? For example, Anne or Greg. Are there additional things that you would like to have tips on for your evaluation? Anything that can even actually we're trying to build up towards the next session. So I guess whenever you want to take over, Kirsten or Pascual, we can even go for the last 3 questions to work towards the coming session. So the first one would be, does anyone relate with the things that we just discussed with Julia, also in your project? And if
me,
not,
Greg, very much so. Kirsten's comments, but also because of the scenario we've been working in, it's been very fluid. So I want to reiterate really what Kirsten said. The approach I've been taking is to keep as broad a view as possible and follow every avenue that develops. But I've been keeping as much qualitative, a really strong qual record, and as much sort of physical evidence keeping that we can. For example, visual, because we've been going down lots of different avenues to try and keep things going forward. So I'm relying on the qualitative stuff primarily, but I've kept a really, really thorough record of development. So I mean, reiterating what Kirsten said, really.
And maybe we can hear from the main takeaways of today, also for Kirsten and Pascual. Like, what are the things you've heard today that you think are the most important topics? Or
actually, I would be almost tempted to kind of be a bit more direct, if that's okay, because I mean, we do have, the idea was that we provide a follow-up session to this one. And potentially some kind of toolkit to help with evaluation. So I guess the question really is what, if anything, would be valuable to explore in the next session, and what, if anything, would be really valuable for you to maybe finish off your evaluation work.
Yeah.
Just so we're not, you know, so we're using time wisely and producing things.
Yeah, and produce something that you can use for your projects, that it's really applicable to your challenges.
And I think it's also fine to say nothing, I guess. It's a sophisticated group of people, but there might be something.
If I can maybe ask something, in my case, I think it would be useful to see maybe some quick example of some evaluation that you did, and maybe some structure of questionnaires and way in which you interview, maybe some tips that through your job you were able like to develop better, and you can give it to us as an example, because I was very interested about this unintended outcome, and it's actually didn't come to my mind of actually leaving an open question at the end saying, tell us something more. So this kind of hint that maybe I know that for you are somehow obvious, but maybe for us they're not so much.
Okay. So almost like dealing with some tricky evaluation scenarios.
Yes,
like
something like that.
Yeah, okay.
Anybody else?
What Julia said.
What Julia said.
Well, don't know really. If you've got any pointers in terms of sort of complex situation and, you know, constructing a narrative and a suitable survey and questions towards the end of that project, we've had, you know, as the scenario I'm sure lots of other people are in here, you know, we've had a very complex dynamics across a very difficult year, and it's been very, very difficult to keep quantitative tabs on progress. So, I mean, a miracle, Kirsten.
A miracle. Well, we'll do our best.
And Alberto, I think you had a final question, or?
Well, I was just curious to know if Anne had anything to add on this. Otherwise, I wanted to ask you guys if the discussion of today helped you realize or reflect on something that maybe you didn't think of before, or if anything, how you found our chat of today, our reflections of today on the topic.
Some examples will be helpful for the rest. And that's all.
Okay, more examples. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
And any answers on the second part of Alberto's question?
Well, for me was actually pretty useful to understand also how we can evaluate for ourselves, to actually understand what are we communicating externally and how to build a plan to what we want to measure also in time. That's something that somehow was in our mind, but I didn't know if I was forcing something for the sake of forcing it or if it was actually useful. And now seeing also your experience make more sense to make this effort in measuring also for ourselves.
Oh.
Yes.
Julia?
Okay, then guys, if...
Yeah, Pascual, you want to add something?
Yeah.
I have a question in mind for the initiative, but I think it is late to drop it. So maybe I can save it for the next session. I don't know.
Sure, we can leave it like that. It makes it promising.
Well, it's just well, regarding the last last thing that Julia said, that the evaluation is an effort, and in Maje and me, in our experience, what we faced almost always is that evaluation requires a lot of resources, time, and I mean, it's an effort, a huge effort. And when we are developing our project, we are struggling with a lot of things, a lot of issues and partners and collaborations and the contents and everything. So we always leave evaluation at the last thing to do. So my question would be that if they, being realistic, they think that they are going to be able, for example, for their initiatives, to include something in terms of evaluation during this part of Designscape, of if they think that they are going to be able to include some things that we were discussing today, or I mean, like a whole theory of changes, to try to go deeper in that, or if it's just something that is interesting, but at the end they think that they are not going to be able to do it. I know it's a really open question that I have it in my mind, and it's the time already, so I don't know.
Oh, but if we have first reactions to it, I think it's still okay to hear that. No quick reactions.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mean, my association is, you're right. Yes, it's expensive, or kind of, it takes work. So there's maybe something about working out how to do it sort of as light touch as possible, while still being meaningful. So kind of really thinking about what data are we already collecting anyhow, maybe because we have to, provide a report to BESNEC about certain things or our projects, and then focusing, there's something about an evaluation. It's always about kind of just focusing on the things that, are critically important to know, and then kind of working with a range of data that we sort of already collecting. So, but yeah, it's certainly, and for me, there's something about role as well. I think whenever you there's something about covering lots of items or lots of different demands within, and often very small project teams, and then sort of creating, then thinking about role and who holds responsibility, I guess, for particular aspects, and giving maybe evaluation to somebody whose sort of job in the team it is to do it. Anyway, just associations. I don't know whether those were your points, Pascal, but that's what I had.
Great. Well, then again, if there's no other comment to add, I think we can leave it here today. Yeah, I think Kerstin, Alberto, we've mentioned it a couple of times. There's another session coming, so stay tuned for that. And yeah, we hope this the exercise of today was valuable. And we're really happy that you joined us. Thanks again, and thanks a lot for that. And yeah, that's it. I think we will also, as usual, send a round of afterthoughts on today via email and make the material available. Yeah. And we'll see you soon, hopefully.
Thank you
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Have a nice day. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.